Hi Ravens, we're going to read from Poisoned by Jennifer Donnelly. This is our winter break read aloud recording number 4 of 4. I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Tuesday as we begin again with our enrichment read alouds every Tuesday and Thursday at 3:15. We're on chapter 50, page 179. What do you mean, a place to die? Will asked. Oma flapped a hand at Sophie. Never mind, boy, you're not going to get a straight story from this one. But Will's eyes, as darkly gray as a storm now, were fixed on Sophie. What do you mean? He asked her again. Sophie didn't want to do this. She didn't want to reveal herself, to reveal her heart, not to Will. He hated her and what she stood for. His whole family did, and yet that's what his gray eyes were asking her to do. They were challenging her to be truthful, to trust him. And she knew that if she lied to him, those eyes would be shuttered against her. And for some reason, one known only to her faulty heart, she couldn't bear that. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she unlaced the neck of her borrowed tunic and pulled it wide open so that he, Oma, Greta, and Arno could see the angry red scar that cleaved her skin. Will's gaze traveled from Sophie's collarbone to the top of her breast. He winced, but did not look away. Arno let out a wide, low whistle. Ugly, isn't it? Sophie said. The story behind it's even uglier. Are you sure you want to hear it? Yes, Will said. Sophie glanced at Greta, worried that what she was going to tell them was too harsh for the girl's young ears. Greta held up her spoon, brandishing it at Sophie like a sword. Don't even think about not telling me, she warned. Turning to her brother, she said, if you put me in my room, I'll listen at the wall. Will sighed, resigned. Go ahead, he said to Sophie. And Sophie did. She told them what had happened to her, starting with her morning ride with her stepmother's huntsman and ending with her escape from Hakon. I believed in Hakon until he tried to kill me. I believed he would help me get my heart back, and now I'll never get it back, and the one inside me will soon wind down. It was quiet when Sophie finished speaking. No one said a word for quite some time, and no one rose to clear the dirty dishes or empty the pot. Dusk lapped at the windows. Arno spoke first. Even if Hakon was on your side, Sophie, I'm not sure he could breach Nimmerher, or best the King of Crows. Why not? Sophie asked. He would have an army with him. Doesn't matter, many have tried. Kings, emperors, warlords, they don't even make it to the moat. The things in the woods, Arno shook his head at a loss to describe them. Monsters, ghouls, terrifying things. They'll kill you if they get a hold of you, but just a glimpse of them sends even the hardest soldiers running for their lives. Sophie remembered the brothers telling her about the terrifying creatures that prowled the grounds of Nimmerher, and how they were too much for Jasper. His heart had given out on the mere sight of them. She feared greatly for Jeremias and Justs. A part of her hoped that they'd given up and returned to the Hollow. If kings and warlords couldn't best the King of Crows, how could they? How do you know all these things? She asked Arno. I've been there, Arno said. Not inside the castle, but close to it. Rumor has it there's a tunnel, a hidden escape route in case Nimmerher ever falls under siege. Many castles have them. I wanted to find it. Why? Greta asked. Arno shrugged. Corvus is a king, right? Kings have nice stuff, and you're a thief, said Greta. Exactly, my clever girl, said Arno, patting her on the head. Arno, who is the King of Crows? Sophie asked, and what does he do with the hearts he takes? I don't know. I hear talk, though. People say that the King of Crows is from a foreign land, that he's a monster himself, a ghost, a vampire. People say there are magical spells to repel his creatures and to keep him away, but as far as I can tell, it's all nonsense. I've been to almost every village, town, and city in the Greenlands, and I've never met one person, not one, who has made it to Nimmerher and lived to tell the tale. Sophie's fear for Jeremias and Justs deepened. Her fear for her own life grew, too. It took her a moment to work up her nerve and ask the question she was most afraid to ask. Do you know if there are spells that can put a heart back? Arno hesitated slightly and then said, I've never heard of one. He quickly added that doesn't mean they don't exist. Another silence descended. Sophie realized that she'd been fooling herself all along. Even with the might of Hakon's army, she wouldn't have been able to regain her heart. It was hopeless, and it always had been. The knowledge was as inescapable and as crushing as an avalanche. This time, Greta broke the silence. "I'm sorry I said that I hate you, Sophie." "Don't worry about it, Greta. I'd feel that way too if I were you," Sophie said. "Why, Sophie? Why did all this happen to you?" Greta asked. "Why did the King of Crows take your heart?" Sophie looked down at her hands. "Oh, Greta," she said, her voice heavy, "I wish I knew." "It doesn't seem fair," said Greta. Sophie smiled ruefully. "No, it doesn't." "How long do you have before your heart?" Will didn't finish the question. Sophie took a deep breath and then said, "Less than 3 weeks now, I think, give or take a few days." A pall fell over the room. The sadness was palpable. Zara, sensing Sophie's distress, put her head in Sophie's lap. As Sophie scratched behind the dog's ears, a volley of coughing burst from Greta. Will was immediately at her side. "I'm not going to bed," she protested as soon as she caught her breath. "If you try to pick me up, I'll go limp as a noodle, I swear." "Calm down. No one's trying to put you to bed. Your hands are blue. You need to sit by the fire," Will said. Greta let him carry her to the chair by the hearth. Oma said that she would brew some mint tea to warm everyone. As Will settled his sister and tucked a blanket around her, Sophie and Arno cleared the dishes and washed them, and then joined Will and Greta. Will stoked the coals and then put a fresh log on top of them. Sophie stared into the flames. "You're very unhappy, Sophie," Greta said. Arno snorted. "That's an understatement." "I wish you weren't." Sophie forced a smile. She was about to lie to Greta, to say that she was fine, when Oma bustled over with the tea. She set the cups down, settled herself in her rocker, and said, "Don't wish Sophie unhappiness away, my child. She needs it. Right now, it's the most valuable thing she's got." "She does?" Greta says. "It is?" Sophie asked. Oma gave a brisk nod. "Absolutely. It's the unhappy people who get things done. Have you ever noticed that? They build things and discover things and invent things like calculus. Only a very unhappy person could have come up with that. The happy ones just sit around eating strudel. They seldom amount to much." Sophie gave her a sidelong look. "You don't believe me?" Oma said, "but I know what I'm talking about. Have you ever heard the tale of the 2 brothers and the ogre?" Greta clapped her hands. "I love stories," she crowed. Oma reached into a basket, picked up her knitting, and started to tell it. 51. "Once upon a time," Oma began, "there was a wealthy merchant who lived in a prosperous town. He had a beautiful daughter, and 2 brothers were in love with her. But an ogre loved her too, and he said he would never marry her on Midsummer's Day. If she refused him, he would kill her and everyone else in the town. The merchant was heartsick. He told the brothers that whichever of them could kill the ogre could marry his daughter. Both brothers asked Tanaquil, the fairy queen, for help. The elder, who was handsome and charming and always laughing, asked for a bag of gold and a jacket of yellow silk. He didn't need the jacket. It had nothing to do with his plans to kill the ogre. He just thought yellow looked good on him. Tanaquil granted his request. The younger brother was plain. He was also well-read and clever, but so shy and quiet that no one knew it. He asked for a bag of gold, too, but not a yellow jacket. He thought that was pushing it, but all the fairy queen gave him was a ball of twine. How the townspeople laughed at him, standing in the square with a ball of twine in his hand. His own brother laughed at him. The younger brother felt hurt and humiliated. All his life, his older brother had been preferred over him. All his life, the world had underrated him. Why should now be any different? His dazzling brother would win the merchant's daughter. Of course he would. "This is the worst, most depressing fairy tale I've ever heard," Will said. "I haven't finished yet," Oma retorted. As the younger brother stared at the ball of twine, it seemed to mock him, she continued. It seemed to be everything was plain and rough, with no charm and nothing funny to say. Angry and heart-sore, he walked to the river and threw it into the water. But just as he turned to walk away, the ball of twine hopped out of the water and rolled up to stop at his feet. The younger brother was very unsettled by this, so he ran away, but the ball of twine rolled after him, growing bigger as it did. It rolled in front of him, blocking him no matter which way he tried to go. Scared now, the younger brother kicked the ball of twine away, over and over, but it rolled back every time, growing bigger, rougher, uglier, until it had become a monster. The boy punched it again and again, fighting with it, struggling against it, trying to escape from it, but he only managed to get himself hopelessly tangled up in it. Exhausted, with no hope for getting free, the young man wept, ready to give up. On winning the merchant's daughter, on making something of himself, on everything, his heart ached so badly. That's when the ball of twine started to speak to him. This is what it said. "Run from me and you will see. I never go. I only grow. Turn your back and I'll attack. I'll knock you down and drag you around. But stand and face me. Let me speak and I'll reveal what you must seek. Your path, your way, the fork afford, no more from, only toward. The task is hard, but you are smart, bold and brave and strong of heart. And never forget when all is done, monsters can't chase unless you run." As the twine spoke, each tangled skein that had held the boy down slowly loosened until he was free, and then it shrank down, becoming only a small ball again, still and silent in his hand. Now, while the younger brother had been fighting with the twine, the elder brother had used his gold to buy cannons. He'd arranged them around the ramparts of the town's wall so that he could fire on the ogre the instant the horrible creature was sighted. But several days passed and no ogre came. The elder brother, who was spoiled and not used to things not going exactly the way he wanted them to, exactly when he wanted them to, grew bored. So he bought 10 barrels of wine with his leftover gold. He threw a party, got drunk, and strutted all around the ramparts in his yellow jacket. The younger brother, meanwhile, had grown hungry, but had no money to buy food. There was a forest outside the town, though, so he used his ball of twine to fashion a snare, caught a hare and roasted it. The meat filled his belly and gave him strength, and when he finished, he reset the snare so that he might eat again the next day. And as he did, he got an idea. That very evening the ogre came. The elder brother was so drunk, he never even saw him approach. But the ogre saw the elder brother. How could he miss him? The fool stuck out like a lemon in his yellow jacket. The ogre snatched him up and bit off his head. Then he squeezed his body like a wineskin and drank all of his blood. But as the ogre was draining the very last drop, a rock hit him in the back of his head. Furious, he threw the elder brother's body down and turned around. The younger brother had thrown the rock, and as the ogre stomped toward him, he threw another one. It hit the ogre smack in the middle of his face and broke his nose. Roaring with fury, he chased the boy, which was just what the younger brother wanted. He led the ogre, who was shouting and cursing and holding a gushing nose, through the woods to a ravine where he got to the very edge. He turned around and pretended to be afraid. The ogre grinned. Step by step, he drew closer to the boy, all the while telling him how he was going to rip off his right arm and eat it, and then rip off his left arm and eat it, and then thwang. The ogre, blinded by his rage, had stepped into a snare the younger brother had set for him. A loop tightened around his ankle, and the next thing he knew, he was dangling upside down. The boy grabbed him by his greasy hair, cut his head off, and brought it to the merchant. The merchant promptly presented the boy with his daughter and called for a minister to come and marry them on the spot, but the boy politely declined. He said he would only court the merchant's daughter if she wished him to, for he knew very well that it was like what it was like to have to take what you were given, whether you wanted it or not. The girl agreed, courted. They courted and fell in love and were married within a year. Weeks after the boy killed the ogre, he went back to the spot where he'd set the snare to search for the ball of twine, but it was gone. He never saw it again. He never needed to. Oma smiled. She rested her knitting needles in her lap. "The end," she said, and she looked at her sleepy-eyed granddaughter. "And now, miss, it's time for bed." Greta protested, but only half-heartedly. "Wait," Oma Will said. "Is there a point, any point at all, to this weird and gruesome story?" "Yes, boy, there is." Her eyes found Sophie. "We must not run from our unhappiness. We must listen to it, it has much to tell us." Will rolled his eyes. He got to his feet, picked Greta up, and carried her to bed. Oma told Arno he could sleep on the floor in Will's room and gave him some bedding. She gave Sophie a pillow and a quilt too, and told her she was welcome to sleep up in the loft, which was opposite the hearth. Sophie thanked her. She turned toward the ladder that led to the loft, but Oma placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. "So you thought a handsome prince was going to save you?" Sophie gave her a bitter smile. "I guess I did." What does a queen need with a prince? You mean my stepmother, making Hakon her heir? I don't know why she... No, I mean you. Sophie tilted her head, puzzled by Oma's words. But I'm not a queen. But you could be, Oma said, pinning Sophie with her steely gaze. Adelaide's not your biggest enemy, or Hakon. You are. They can tell you everything you're not, but they can't make you believe it. Only you can do that. She released Sophie. You want your heart back, girl? Go get it. And then she left the room to tend her granddaughter. Sophie watched her go, thinking about what she said. Then she climbed the narrow ladder and found herself among ropes of garlic, bunches of herbs, and several salamis, and a large ham. After clearing a space on the floor, she made herself a comfortable place to sleep from her bedding. She cast a glance down at the room below her to make sure Zara was all right, but saw that she needn't have worried. The dog had curled into a ball on a soft rug in front of the hearth. Sophie was exhausted, but couldn't sleep. Her head was full of images of rampaging ogres, of talking tangled balls of twine, of a sad boy who didn't have money or an army or weapons to defeat fearsome adversaries, who had only himself. Lying still, staring out of the loft's small window at the night sky, Sophie listened not to the whispers and the mocking laughter of the court, not to her stepmother's lectures, her dire predictions, her threats, not to Hakon's murderous goodbye, but to a voice inside that was small and tired of hiding, of pretending, of always being wrong. It was hard to listen to the voice. It was painful. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks, but Oma was right. That voice had so much to tell her. Sometime before midnight, Sophie made up her mind, and then she closed her eyes, and finally she slept. The fire had burned low, but its dim light illuminated Oma. She was wearing a white nightdress. Her gray hair trailed over her shoulder in long, loose braids. She was rocking Greta by the fire. The child had woken in great pain. Oma had carried her from her bedroom to the hearth where it was warm. The little girl was suffering. Her body was rigid. Her eyes were squeezed shut. Oma reached for a cup on a nearby table that contained medicine and with some difficulty got Greta to drink from it. It helped. After a few minutes, Greta's body relaxed a little and she was able to lie down in a trundle bed that Oma had made up near the fire. She kept hold of her granddaughter's hand, though, listening as Oma sang her a lullaby. Finally, the child fell asleep. Oma gently withdrew her hand from Greta's and pulled the child's blanket up around her shoulders. The only woman sat down again in her rocker, leaned her head back, and closed her eyes. Worry deepened the lines in her forehead and the hollows in her cheeks. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a woman dressed in black with wild hair and wilder eyes. She peered at the little girl's face with an expression of tenderness and sorrow, and then she touched the child's cheek. And as she did, the silvery tears still clinging to the girl's skin turned to pearls and fell to the pillow. Greta groaned. She shifted in her sleep. Zara heard her. The dog was still curled up on a rug by the hearth, and in an instant she was on her feet, growling low in her throat. Oma sat up and looked at Zara. She followed the dog's gaze, and then she and the visitor locked eyes. The woman in black retreated, melting into the shadows. "Hiding, are you?" Oma asked her. "I would too if I were you, given the damage you've done in this house." The woman bit a thumbnail. Her expression turned baleful. "You're following the princess, aren't you? Why? What interest does she hold for you? Perhaps you simply enjoy tormenting her, but I think there's more to it. Why does your brother want the girl? Is she a threat to him? Is it possible that he, the king of crows, fears her?" Oma rose, picked up a poker, and prodded the logs in the fireplace. Flames curled their thin fingers around it. "Ah, who can understand you or your ways? I doubt even you do." She nodded at Greta. "A chest full of pearls couldn't make up for what you've done to this child. People say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and sometimes that's true," she allowed. "But sometimes what doesn't kill you makes you wish to God it had." She sat down again. "The princess will have to face him, and she may well end up a pile of bones like all the other poor souls who get lost in these woods. And the world will grow a bit darker when she does. Perhaps that's what you want, you and your brother both." Zara whined. She walked over to Oma and put her head in the elderly woman's lap. Oma scratched the dog's ears, her eyes still on the visitor. "I suppose you can't help who you are. None of us can. That girl sleeping in the loft cannot help who she is either. Scared, lost, so full of doubt. Maybe she is what her stepmother says she is, too soft, too kind, led by her heart. Oma looked down at Zara, her lips curved into a small, defiant smile. And if she is, what of it? She chucked the dog under the chin. Too small to kill a wolf, eh? But only a small dog moves fast enough to kill a snake. Sometimes the thing that makes us all wrong is the thing that makes us perfect. When she looked up again, the woman was gone. 53. The queen sat on the floor, staring into her mirror. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders. Her eyes were sunken and dull. She seemed to grow thinner with each passing day, as if she were being devoured from the inside. There was no reason for it. She'd gotten rid of the princess. She'd made a strong, bold man her heir. Together they would invade the hinterlands before the king of the realm attacked the Greenlands. All was as it should be, and yet Adelaide was more afraid than she'd ever been. It seemed as if the more she tried to diminish her fears, the bigger they grew. She looked nothing like the young girl she was watching in the mirror. That girl was straight-backed and strong, with a general's bearing. The only thing they shared was a sadness in their intelligent blue eyes. The girl was sumptuously dressed and richly bejeweled. She was standing at an altar with a man who was twice her age. Her brother, the king, beamed from his seat in the royal chapel. He was happy about the marriage and the alliance it afforded him. He was even happier to be getting rid of Adelaide. She'd saved his life, saved his kingdom, and as soon as he'd turned 18, he'd thanked her by marrying her off to a man who did not love her, a man with a dead wife and a young daughter. Mirror, mirror, on the wall, Adelaide whispered. Who's the fairest of them all? A voice whispered back, a voice that sounded like footsteps in the dark or rats in the wall. The king of crows appeared. He knelt down beside her. Your own brother put that story about, didn't he? He said that you were vain, that you constantly asked the mirror, who's the fairest of all? Instead, who will bring about my fall? He did it to diminish you because he was jealous. You were 10 times the ruler he could have ever hoped to be. The king of the hinterlands is fond of telling it. The emperor of Cathay, too. He peered into the glass. Words spoken, words written in them. You find the story, but in the shadows they cast, you find the storyteller. With effort, Adelaide tore herself from the images in the glass and faced him. Her weary eyes met his bright, busy ones. But you didn't summon me to talk about the past, did you? He asked. You wish to talk about the present. Adelaide nodded. I am uneasy, unsettled. I can neither eat nor sleep. There is a reason for it, and you sense it. I know you do. The princess still lives. The snakes did not kill her. She is in the dark wood, making her way to Nemmermer. She must be stopped. The king of crows' words sparked anger in the queen. Dark flames burned behind her eyes. Tell me how, she said, rising from the floor. The king rose with her. Take this, he said, drawing something from his pocket. Find the girl and give it to her. It was a large hair comb exquisitely carved from jet in the shape of a scorpion. The creature's eyes were faceted rubies. Its pincers and the sharp stinger at the end of its curved tail were black diamonds. The gems gleamed in the firelight. Hurry, the king of crows said, putting a comb into the queen's hand. The girl must not make it to Nemmermer. She must not find her heart. There is the sound of beating wings, and then he's gone. The queen trembles. Why does she not know? For a moment she feels breathless and weak, as if the king took from her all that is strong and sure. She stands tall, reminds herself that she holds the power, and she summons this pale king as he does her bidding. But who is the real master here? Who grows powerful and who grows weak? Adelaide slips the comb into her pocket. She calls for her cloak. She calls for her horse. As her ladies scurry to and fro, she presses a hand to her chest over her heart, as if reassuring herself that it's still there. 54. Will saw the note as he walked into the kitchen. Sophie had left it on a chair on top of the clothing she'd borrowed and the bedding she'd used, all neatly folded. Dear Oma, I'm going to get my heart back, and then I'm going to get my crown back. I have no idea how I'm going to do either of those things. Yours, Sophie. P.S. Thank you for supper and for a nice warm bed. Please tell Greta goodbye and tell Will thank you. I'm sorry to leave without saying goodbye in person, but I fear I'll lose my nerve if I see your kind faces. I'll miss you all, even Arno. Please take care of Zara for me." Oma came into the kitchen, carrying a pail of milk from their cow as Will finished the note. "What did you tell her?" he demanded. "That if she wants her heart back, she should go get it." "I can't believe you, Oma. You told her to go to Nemmermer by herself? She won't make it within a mile of that place. She'll die." Oma shrugged. "She'll die if she doesn't go. Better to try than to just give up, don't you think?" Will shook his head, muttering to himself. He put the note down. Then he returned to his room. "Uh-oh," Oma said Greta from her chair by the fire. "Now you've done it." Oma waved her hand at her. "He's just sulking. He'll get over it." Greta shook her head. "He's not, and he won't." She was right. 10 minutes later, Will was back, his rucksack in one hand. Arno was right behind him. Zara danced a circle around the two men yipping. Oma looked up from the pan of bacon she was frying. "No," she said, "you're not going after her." "Yes, I am," Will said. Oma glared. "Why don't you look for your own heart while you're at it? Seems to me someone took that, too." "I have to go. She's all by herself. Someone's got to keep her from getting lost." Oma laughed. It was not a happy sound. "You're the one who's lost, boy. She's a princess. You're a pauper." "Really, Oma? I had no idea. Thanks for pointing that out." "Say, by some miracle, you do get her heart back. Then what, I tell you?" "Thought you would." "She marries some king, and you're right back here." "Right back here's not so bad." Oma heaved a sigh of resignation. "Be careful, boy. We need you, too." Will put an arm around his grandmother and kissed the top of her head. "I'll be back before you know it." Oma dipped a hand into her pocket. "Here, take these. You can sell them for a few coins along the way. You may need some money." She took his hand and put 3 pearls in his palm. "Where did you get them?" Will asked, surprised. "An old friend gave them to me," Oma replied. "You ready?" Arno asked. "There's a nice graveyard just past the Black Hills, a fancy one, with roomy mausoleums. I can get us into the Schneider's vault if no one's changed the lock. We should get going, though, if we want to make it there by nightfall." "You're going too?" Oma asked him. "I think I will. It's been a while since I was over Nemmermer way. Got someone I want to say hello to there." Oma made bacon sandwiches for Will and Arno, then wrapped up one of them to take to Sophie. She also packed a loaf of bread, salami, cheese, and fruit for them. Then the 2 men left, and Oma and Greta stood in the yard watching as they walked down the path from the cottage into the wood. "Sophie's wrong, Oma," Greta said. "About what, child?" "About the queen. She didn't try to kill Sophie because she thinks she's weak or foolish." "No? Then why did she do it?" Greta thought of the dirty, skinny girl she'd met. The girl with a scar running down her chest, bite marks on her arm, and smoke in her hair. Then she said, "Because she's afraid of her."